Let's do a breakdown of the INFP personality. What I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be breaking down the cognitive functions that make up the INFP ego. So that's that 4-letter code there. I'm going to be going over some of the INFP's expression, how INFPs tend to come across, and what's sort of going on inside the INFP a bit. I'm going to talk about what I notice as some of the common strengths and weaknesses of the INFP personality type. And I'm also going to give you a list of things that I see that are just super INFP. They really depict the INFP ethos really well. I'll leave some timestamps down below, so if you want to skip to a certain portion of the video because you're just interested in that part, you can. And if you're interested in a more in-depth breakdown of the INFP personality type, if you're interested in learning about how the ego relates to the superego and the unconscious and the subconscious, there are already some amazing videos breaking that down that are going to go into a lot more depth than I'll go into here today. So I'm just going to be doing this in my way. Alright, so let's give you a little bit of a breakdown of the INFP cognitive functions that make up their ego. If you're not that familiar with cognitive functions, that's completely okay. Basically, with cognitive functions, you have judging functions, so the functions you use to make decisions, and you have perceiving functions, so they're the functions used to sort of take in information. Every type has a combination of extroverted and introverted functions, and there's an order of use, or what they call preferences usually in MBTI. So you have a dominant function, which is introverted feeling for the INFP. You have a secondary function, which is extroverted intuition for the INFP. Then below extroverted intuition, you have introverted sensing. And then just at the bottom there for the INFP, you have extroverted thinking. And we'll give a bit of a breakdown of what these mean in order. So the first function in the INFP ego stack, their most dominant function, the function that they use the most, is introverted feeling. Introverted feeling is all about morals, and I think a really good word to describe introverted feeling is alignment. It's all about how do I feel about it? Does it align with my values? Is it the right thing in my sort of felt sense? It's often a more emotional response to data, and with an introverted feeling dominant, like an INFP, everything is going to be going through that filter of if something actually feels right for me. Is this authentic to me as a person? And that's kind of how the INFP's dominant function is coming into play here. So the second function for the INFP, the one they're using in the sort of the passenger seat slot to their introverted feeling, is extroverted intuition. A really good way of explaining extroverted intuition is to say exploration. Extroverted intuition is all about exploring new and novel ideas and disparate threads of information. It's very plugged into what might be, what could be. It's not so much focused on what is right now. Extroverted intuition wants to explore new, novel ideas and sort of jump from one thing to the next. You'll often notice with people who use extroverted intuition, a lot, there tends to be a tangential component to it. Like extroverted intuition is going to want to bounce from one thing to the next in the same conversation. So that's the function that the INFP is using second to introverted feeling. The third function, or the tertiary function for the INFP, so the one they're using just below extroverted intuition, is introverted sensing. Now, introverted sensing is a lot more systematic and chronological. You can imagine introverted sensing kind of like a train. It's on a linear trajectory from one to the other. It pertains to memory and learning from your experiences, learning from your mistakes. And introverted sensing is also related to routines and structure. With the cognitive functions, you have a link from the first to the third cognitive function and the fourth to the second to the fourth, So with the introverted feeling, that's going to be linked to the introverted sensing, and that's how you hear about that FI-SI loop for the INFP, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But introverted sensing is all about chronological linear exploration, routines and structure, and learning from memory. The fourth and lowest function for the INFP, the function that they tend to be using the least, is extroverted thinking. Extroverted thinking pertains to rationality. It's all about getting the thing done effectively and efficiently. It's to-do list energy. Getting things done in the right time frame, getting things done in the way that just suits the group the best. And like I said, it's very rational. So it's often focused on like the credentials of another person. It's like, okay, this person is going to be the most competent because they have a PhD or something like that. It's not really about how everyone feels or if it makes sense to everyone. It's just about getting the thing done efficiently and effectively. And you can see INFPs really struggling with this. I can attest to that. And like I said, that extroverted thinking is connected to the extroverted intuition there. So they can kind of blend together. And as the INFP develops more, they're definitely going to be able to use that extroverted thinking for good. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the strength section of the video. All right, so let's get into the fun parts of the video, the first fun part of the video. And we're going to talk a bit about the INFP expression. How do INFPs come across and what are INFPs experiencing a lot of the time? First thing I've got to say here is the INFP can come across as quite contemplative, reserved, and a little bit dreamlike a lot of the time. Like I said, you've got someone who's using introverted feeling. They're making sense of the vast swath of experiences and they're kind of fitting that together to create a code inside of themselves. So you often have someone who's sort of perpetually turning inward. And with that connection to extroverted intuition, they are exploring a lot of different threads of information at once. So I think this is why a lot of INFPs identify with being HSPs or highly sensitive people, because they're exploring so many different things at once. That extroverted intuition is picking up on a lot all the time, and that introverted feeling is processing a lot all the time. So there's sort of someone who tends to draw in and needs to have the time to make sense and process their experiences. Another thing I notice about INFPs is that they tend to be quite sentimental. I notice that a lot of INFPs, we have like a sense of connection to a certain place or a certain person or even food. And it's not so much about those things out in the world. It's about they serve as like symbols to how we feel about something. So a lot of INFPs can come across as very attached to certain things. They can have kind of like a reverence and a respect for certain rituals. And you can see that with that FI-SI because they can sort of hone in and draw into something. So sentimental is something I notice that comes up in INFPs quite a lot as well. I said how introverted feeling can be associated with alignment. I think alignment is a really good word that explains introverted feeling. And I noticed that for INFPs is they tend to want to find a sense of emotional harmony and alignment inside of themselves. They want to have a sense of what feels right and what actually feels good to me, like what is actually in line with my values in that moment. I think when INFPs are in alignment and they are in harmony with how they feel, they can come off as very sweet. And they also have a fantastic ability to notice beauty in things. I think when the INFP's emotional body is together and they actually feel connected, like you're saying something to them and they can connect to it and it aligns with their values, they feel like they have the space to express themselves to you, they can come across as very sweet and very insightful a lot of the time as well. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that felt sense of what is right for the INFP. INFPs also are very individualistic. They want to express themselves in their way. They don't just want to be a part of some mob and conform to a pack or a group and just do the right thing all the time, depending on what the group thinks. I think for the INFP, because they're quite sensitive, they're bringing in a lot of this information through that introverted feeling and that extroverted intuition. They want to have a sense of the way I'm expressing myself in the world, the way I'm connecting to people. I want it to be based on my own inner code, right? I want to come across in my way. I think a lot of INFPs, I used to know a girl who was an INFP, and she would put hours into these intricate outfits and just express herself exactly how she wanted to be. And it's interesting how she could kind of take this feeling and then she could kind of associate it with something in the physical world, like an outfit, like just like a set of clothing items, and she could really express a part of herself in that. So I think INFPs tend to be very individualistic. They're very expressive people in how they come across and how they want to dress, how they want to conduct themselves. The last thing I'll say about INFP expression is that they have an incredible ability to mimic and emphasize. So the INFP is not going to be feeling emotion so much through having sympathy for other people like an INFJ would perhaps, but they're more about having empathy. Like if an INFP is connecting to someone emotionally, they're going to be feeling those emotions at an introverted level, like we said with introverted feeling. So they're not necessarily just connecting sheerly to someone else's feelings, but they're feeling someone else's feelings and the feelings of a group or a culture. They're feeling that inside of themselves. So they're very much internally making sense of what's going on inside of them, and they can kind of mimic and use their voice in a certain way and express themselves in a certain way, which is really connected to how they feel. That's why they can actually be incredible speakers and incredible artists as well. INFPs, like I said with that girl and her outfits, they have an ability to tune into a feeling and sort of go really deep into that and then create beautiful things that really just express the ambiance of that emotion, or they really express what they mean through lyrics and through symbolism, poetry, painting, anything else like that. I think INFPs can have a wonderful sense of self-expression because that's really what introverted feeling wants to do. It wants to tune into what is right and express that out and connect life to that. So let's talk a little bit about some of those INFP strengths, some of the areas where INFPs can really excel and really create magic in the world. I think the first area that INFPs can really excel in is forms of therapy, counseling, psychology, things like that. If you look at the INFP's brain in a brain scan, the area of their brain that tends to light up most readily is the listening space of the brain. They have a fantastic ability to tune into another person, tune into a situation, and see what feels right. So it's almost like they have a lie and truth detector a lot of the time, or at least what feels true or false to them. I think INFPs can be just tremendous listeners, and the ability to actually feel what's going on with another person. I think this makes them really excel in counseling or therapy, or even just actually talking to people in their lives. I think INFPs tend to be people that other people come to when they have something going on because they know they can hold that space really well and they can really accommodate for another person's feelings in that moment. INFPs make incredible artists. Some of the best artists in history have definitely been INFPs. I'm thinking of J.R.R. Tolkien. His ability to use extroverted intuition and explore the whole vast world of Middle-earth and Mordor and bring all that together and what felt right to him to create these characters through. I know a girl who's a painter and an INFP, and her paintings are so beautiful because she manages to just capture this ambiance. It's like, it's not just art that's focused on looking good and because it's a certain style and time period. It's really about being able to depict those feelings in art form. So INFPs can make just incredible artists and incredible musicians as well. If you've ever heard the artist Aurora, she is an INFP, and the way she can use sounds and lyrics together in that way to really just permeate something out into the world is absolutely incredible. So they can make just incredible artists. INFPs can also be really adept in social dynamics. I'm not necessarily saying socializing itself. INFPs do tend to be more introverted. We need a lot of time for ourselves. We do want that space to be able to make sense of ourselves in our own way. And we do need a lot of time to process things that are going on. But more the sense of social dynamics. Like when you have extroverted intuition like that and you're noticing just a million things at once, and you're sort of processing all that and making sense of it. I think INFPs from an early age can become very adept at making sense of, okay, this person's going to do that and they're like that. I can kind of read that temperament and how that's going to interact with this other person, and then that's going to have an effect on the business, or that's going to have an effect on this family, and that's going to sort of bounce from here to there. It's a sense of knowing how social mechanics work and how they fit together. I think a really good example of this on a much broader level is someone like Robert Greene. Robert Greene wrote the 48 Laws of Power, he wrote Seduction, he wrote the Laws of Human Nature and the Art of War, and also the 50th Law with 50 Cent. And he just has this incredible ability to notice what's going on in different time periods, different social dynamics, and he's really honed that skill to understand social dynamics and cultural dynamics. So INFPs can be really good with social dynamics, I think. I think another area, and the last area that INFPs tend to really excel in my mind, is as advisors. I think INFPs make fantastic right hands to the king. They're really good because they have that sense of morals, and they also have that sense of exploration, of noticing how different things link together. So I think INFPs can make fantastic advisors and mediators. I'm not a big fan of the 16 personalities test, but one thing I think they really do well is classifying the INFP personality type as a mediator. I mean, you have someone who is so good at understanding social dynamics and the different ways that people work together. And I think INFPs can be really good at noticing how there's certain biases in people or how there's certain difficulties. They don't just get too caught up in the fight of what's going on. I think because they're turning inward, they tend to notice, oh, okay, that's the best way to approach the situation. And they can definitely help with giving advice and actually making sure the group all clicks together in that way as well. So what are some of the most common difficulties and weaknesses for the INFP personality type? The first thing that I see INFPs really struggling with a lot of the time is conformity and fitting in. Introverted feeling is very idealistic and very individualistic. So fitting into a mob, like a school environment, a work environment, different social systems, it can feel really uncomfortable for the INFP because it seems like there's this societal and cultural pressure to conform a lot of the time. And for INFPs, it's like, we want to express ourselves in our way. We don't just want to do things the way everyone else is doing them, but it seems like sometimes you get that implicit message that that's the only way to do things in this situation. I think a lot of INFPs can find themselves not fitting into these categories, not fitting into these boxes, and it can be really difficult in a world like this. So I think conformity and fitting in can be a big weakness. And obviously it's a strength in itself to have that individuality, but a lot of the time the INFP can come off as something of an iconoclast, really, and sort of push against the cultural values. And again, although that always is going to have a strength side to it, because if not, we would just always do things the same way. We wouldn't have people who have any sort of vision. It can be a real difficulty and a strength for the INFP when the world expects you to turn up a certain way, even when you don't really feel like it in yourself. Something else that I notice as a difficulty or a weakness for INFPs a lot of the time, and I can definitely attest to this myself, is actually making real and actualizing the vision that you have. Because we're so expressive and we have so many different influences, we're picking up on so many different things, we tend to have a lot of ideas. We tend to have a lot of things that we want to create, and we can see a lot of different potential avenues for us and potentials for change and a new way of expressing things. But the color in that extroverted intuition exploration mode, the color of that vision doesn't seem to really match actually buckling down and doing the thing. And for me, if I want to actually get a project done or I want to do something, I need to find a way of clicking into that and aligning in myself. So I think it's kind of like it's not really expectation versus reality, it's more exploration and imagination versus reality. I think this can be really difficult for a lot of INFPs. Another difficulty can be managing the fast pace of the world. The sort of fact that it's like, okay, we have a sensor-based society where it's like, all right, you've got a sensing and thinking, you have to get things done. You need to know exactly what you want to do. You need to know exactly who you are. You need to know how you want to do it. You need to have the path and the strategy and the structure all figured out by the time you're like 22. And if you don't, you're going to be a failure. That's how it can feel a lot of the time. And I think that there's a certain pace to that if you're someone who tends to turn inward and want to process things to make sense of what is right in this situation for you, that can come off as really abrasive. It can feel like this pace is just too much sometimes. And like I said, a lot of INFPs self-identify as highly sensitive people because we are picking up on a lot of the time. We do need to process that for ourselves, and it can take... You hear about a lot of INFPs having quarter-life crises, right? Because I think by the time we get into our 20s and into our mid-20s, we have a sense of like, we're really starting to think about, who do I want to be? What do I want to do with my time? What do I want to do with my energy? What kind of people do I want to surround myself with? And the idea a lot of the time, it seems like, is you should just know those things. And I think it can sometimes take us a bit longer to figure those things out. I think that can be a major difficulty for us a lot of the time. The last thing is, I said about that FI-SI loop. So let's talk a bit about that thing there. The FI-SI loop is basically using introverted feeling to turn in, and then SI sort of takes over and there's a honing in to a certain emotion. So we're picking up on all these different influences, we're picking up on all these different things, and then we're plugging that in, going for our feelings, and then we can get sort of attached to one particular way of looking at it, I think. There can be a sense of, oh, I'm feeling this way because of this, but then as we go into it more with introverted sensing and we're sort of exploring that, it's like it just prompts more feeling, and then as we get more feeling, we have more to explore, so we go more in with introverted sensing. And there can be kind of a loop like that, I notice a lot of the time. I can't tell you how many days I've just sat completely absorbed in a particular feeling or emotion, and I'm journaling and I'm thinking and I'm sort of speaking it out and I'm trying to make sense of it. But then I realize that it's not ever really quite right, and it can take up a lot of time. And the only thing that I can often do to get out of that state is to actually break the cycle by tuning into extroverted intuition, looking at a new possibility and actually taking action, and it can take care of itself. But I tend to want to process and make sense of it inside through FI-SI, and it can serve as being kind of a loop sometimes. So I think being caught in emotions and being caught in our own emotionality can often be the biggest weakness for us as INFPs. Alright, so this is the part of the video that I've been most excited to make. And I've got a list for you of things that I see as very INFP. I want you to keep in mind here that I'm not saying that only INFPs are going to be attracted to these things. I'm not saying that INFPs will necessarily be attracted to these things at all. I'm just saying that the quality, the essence behind a lot of these examples strike me as very INFP. They really depict that INFP philosophy and ethos. So with that in mind, let's get into this list. So the first thing I see as very INFP is all manner of alternative therapy. The first example I have here is internal family systems therapy developed by Richard Schwartz. Internal family systems isn't about looking at a person as one individual with just one set of thoughts and one set of beliefs, and it's about looking inside and noticing and observing all different parts of the personality and how they express themselves in different ways. It's about seeing how different parts can get what Richard Schwartz calls burdened. They can get stuck inside and they have to perform roles sort of like as a compensatory function. And there's a sense of just getting inside and getting in touch with all these different parts and making sense out of them one by one and connecting them and there being an overarching sense of self that homogenizes all these parts together. I see that as a very INFP way of looking at things, right? It's very much based on introverted feeling and connecting to certain emotions and how they make sense. Another example would be Person-Centered Therapy by Carl Rogers. Person-centered therapy is all about looking at a individual for their values and their sense of self overall, not just as a cold analytical approach to diagnosing a client as a therapist. It can feel very dehumanizing. Person-centered therapy is all about exploring the whole person and seeing how all those different constituent parts click together and create a sense of identity, and then being able to honor and hold that identity with reverence strikes me as a very INFP way of looking at things. Also, art therapy. Any kind of art or expressive therapy, like being able to take a feeling or take something that's inside and make a painting out of it, or make a song out of it, make a YouTube video out of it, journal about it, make a fictional character that depicts those qualities. It's sort of imbuing that inner sense into something out in the world, so it has an outlet for expression. And the last one on this list I have is logotherapy by Viktor Frankl. Logotherapy is all about meaning and values. It's all about finding a sense of underlying meaning, no matter how difficult life can get, no matter how much challenge we have. There's a sense of finding a purpose in life and having that purpose of it as a driving force and as a driving inner philosophy inside. Strikes me as super INFP. Second thing that I have on this list is personality psychology in general. MBTI, for example, strikes me as a very INFP thing. The Big Five, looking at these different behavioral traits and behavioral models, cognitive models, and making sense of different aspects of the self. I think the INFP identity tends to be very fluid. There tends to be a sense of not really knowing exactly who we are because we're exploring a lot of different avenues and we're making sense of a lot of complex inner information. So something like MBTI, understanding cognitive functions, understanding how the mind works and how it clicks together, understanding how different people have different personalities and different modes of expression, strikes me as a very INFP thing. I think there is a reason why the INFP subreddit is the biggest personality type subreddit by far. And it's because this kind of community attracts a lot of INFPs. They're people who are looking to make sense of themselves and compare what's going on inside of them to other people and contrast that to see where they fit in the bigger picture. Counterculture is very INFP in my mind. It has that INFP essence behind it. It's kind of like, okay, a culture is doing one thing. There's a set and a one way of doing things. And then a counterculture can kind of come up and be like, no, we get that, but we don't really want to just do it in this way. And again, I'm not saying that everyone in every counterculture is an INFP by any stretch, but the idea behind counterculture in general and having a new culture emerge out of the old one is, strikes me as highly INFP. Some philosophies that I think depict the INFP a lot are Taoism, Zen, and they're sort of Eastern philosophies, even Bhakti yoga to some degree. And in Western philosophy, the philosophy of people like Albert Camus and Soren Kierkegaard, they were apparently both INFPs, and you can definitely see some very INFP qualities behind the philosophies I've mentioned there. With Taoism, the notion of swimming downstream and not resisting and kind of integrating yourself into the world, into the situation. The concept of wu wei in Taoism, moving with and moving and flowing like water, has a very INFP quality to it to me. And the same with Zen, the notion of non-doing and actually just really appreciating and really coming to terms with being itself. There's a sort of a reverence and an appreciation for consciousness and for being itself, and not just giving everything labels and charting everything on a board and making sense of it all the time. It's more of a felt sense of the present moment, and there's kind of a notion of emptiness and just being able to relax into that moment and be still. Strikes me as very INFP. As for the Western philosophies there, with Camus, you can see that sense of absurdism, like Camus, and absurdism to me strikes me as very INFP. I think INFPs can be very aware of how ridiculous culture can tend to be and how ridiculous traditional and cultural norms can come across. I'm not necessarily saying that they're ridiculous in and of themselves. I know that they mean a lot to a lot of people, and we have to appreciate everyone's individuality and their differences in that. But I think INFPs, with that extroverted intuition, there's just a noticing of like, why are people doing it that way? Couldn't we be doing it in a different way? Couldn't we be doing it in a way where there can be more sharing and more interconnection? Isn't there a way of doing that where we can build something better, or we can build something that's more effective for people? There's an idealistic sense of systems thinking there, I notice a lot of the time for INFPs. So yeah, I see those philosophies really seem to depict that for me. The last thing that I have on the list, and one that I think is, these are really interesting models in general, is developmental psychology models. Models like spiral dynamics, developed by Claire Graves and Don Beck, Christopher Cohen. Models like the 9 stages of ego development by Susan Cook-Greuter. And also just integral models, like Ken Wilber, for example, has a really fantastic integral model of consciousness. Or John Kabat-Zinn, his model of meditation, and how it's like a structured, interconnected system that has different stages to reach, and there are different issues and strengths and weaknesses with different stages, and sort of noticing that structure and that system. I think INFPs in general can be incredible systems thinkers, but they're not so much focused on creating systems that are effective models. They're not really intellectual in that way. They're more idealistic a lot of the time. There's a sense of noticing how a model can really impact people well, right? It's understanding the psychology and the inner world of people. I think this is something that strikes me as just highly INFP. All right. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. I wanted to do something a little bit different, and something that got more of a feeling of the INFP type, and not just some cold breakdown of the cognitive functions in general. I wanted to give something a little bit more expressive and a little bit more playful in that sense. If you enjoyed this, if you learned something new, help me build up the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing the video to anyone who you feel like would get value out of it. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and that's me.